Hey everyone, it's great to have you back on the channel. Today, I have something truly chilling to share with you, a story sent in by one of our subscribers, Ayumi, all the way from Japan. Ayumi's story is one that's been passed down through her family for generations, and it involves an ancient, cursed Japanese doll that her grandmother bought from an antique shop in Kyoto. This tale is filled with eerie twists and dark secrets, so make sure you're settled in because this one is going to send shivers down your spine. Without further ado, let's dive into Ayumi's story. Dear Mr. Phantom Knight, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Ayumi, and I'm writing to share a story that has haunted my family for generations. This story is about an ancient, cursed Japanese doll that my grandmother purchased from an antique shop many years ago. It has been a well-kept secret in our family, a tale whispered among the elders during long, cold nights. But the time has come for the truth to be revealed. I believe that by sharing this story, I might finally put to rest the evil that has plagued us for so long. It all began when my grandmother, a woman of deep curiosity and love for history, decided to visit a quaint antique shop nestled in the narrow streets of Kyoto. The shop, Yami no Shogyo, which translates to Commerce of Darkness, was known to have artifacts from the Edo period and beyond. However, few knew that the shop also housed objects far more sinister. On a chilly autumn day, my grandmother wandered into Yami no Shogyo, drawn by a strange compulsion. The shop was dimly lit, with rows of ancient artifacts and trinkets lining the shelves. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, incense, and something else, a faint, acrid smell that she couldn't quite place. As she browsed, her attention was inexplicably drawn to a small, elaborately crafted doll sitting on a high shelf. The doll was dressed in a vibrant kimono, the fabric adorned with intricate patterns of cranes and cherry blossoms. Its face was porcelain, painted with delicate features, a serene expression, dark almond-shaped eyes, and lips as red as blood. Something about the doll captivated her. Perhaps it was the craftsmanship, or maybe it was the way the doll seemed to almost breathe in the dim light, its eyes following her every move. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a long white beard and a hunched back, noticed her interest and approached her. "You have a keen eye, madam," he said in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "This doll is very special. It is said to have been crafted during the Edo period by a master doll maker. It has been in my family for many generations." Despite the shopkeeper's words, there was something in his tone that hinted at a deeper, darker story, a story he was not entirely willing to share. My grandmother, oblivious to the ominous undertones, felt an overwhelming urge to possess the doll. She asked for the price, and the shopkeeper named a sum far lower than she had expected. "Are you sure?" she asked, surprised by the low price for such a beautifully made artifact. The shopkeeper hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering with what seemed to be a mix of fear and relief. "It has been here for a long time," he said finally. "Perhaps it is time for it to find a new home." My grandmother, eager to take the doll home, quickly paid the shopkeeper and left the store. As she walked out, she didn't notice the way the shopkeeper's eyes lingered on the doll, or the way his expression shifted to one of deep concern. When my grandmother brought the doll home, she placed it on a shelf in the living room, where it could be admired by visitors. At first, everything seemed normal. The doll became a conversation piece, with guests often commenting on its beauty and intricate design. However, it wasn't long before strange things began to happen. The first incident occurred late one night. My grandmother was awoken by a soft, rustling sound coming from the living room. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but when she got up to investigate, she found that the windows were tightly shut. The rustling continued, and she approached the living room. She noticed that the sound was coming from the direction of the doll. When she entered the room, she was shocked to find that the doll had moved from its place on the shelf. It was now sitting on the floor facing the doorway, as if it had been waiting for her. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, and there was a strange, oppressive feeling in the air. Thinking she must have simply knocked the doll over earlier in the day, my grandmother picked it up and placed it back on the shelf. But as she turned to leave the room, she heard a soft, almost imperceptible giggle. She froze, her heart racing, but when she turned around, the room was silent, and the doll remained still. This was just the beginning. In the following weeks, the strange occurrences escalated. My grandmother would often find the doll in different places around the house, sometimes sitting at the dining table, other times on her bed, always facing the doorway. She began to hear whispers in the middle of the night, soft voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Objects in the house started to move on their own. Plates would slide off the table, pictures would tilt or fall from the walls, and doors would open and close by themselves. The air around the doll seemed to grow colder with each passing day, and the once beautiful doll began to take on a more sinister appearance. Its serene expression now seemed twisted, and its eyes, once so lifelike, now seemed to follow her with a malevolent gaze. One night, as my grandmother was preparing to go to bed, she heard a loud crash coming from the living room. Rushing to see what had happened, she found that the doll had fallen from the shelf, shattering a vase that had been placed nearby. But what terrified her most was the sight of the doll's face. It was no longer the calm, serene expression she had grown accustomed to. Instead, the doll's mouth was open in a silent scream, and its eyes were wide with what appeared to be fear. She knew then that something was very wrong. But it wasn't until she started having the dreams that she realized just how deep the darkness ran. The dreams began innocently enough. At first, my grandmother would dream of the doll sitting on its shelf, staring at her with its unnerving gaze. But as the nights went on, the dreams grew more vivid and terrifying. She dreamed of the doll coming to life, its porcelain skin cracking and splitting to reveal something dark and writhing beneath. In one dream, she found herself standing in the middle of an ancient forest. The trees twisted and gnarled as if they were alive. The doll was there, sitting at the base of a large, blackened tree. Its eyes were glowing with an unnatural light, and as she approached, she heard a voice whispering in her ear. "You should never have taken me," the voice said, cold and hollow. "Now you will pay the price." In another dream, she was in a dark, empty room, the walls covered in strange pulsating symbols. The doll was there again, but this time it was much larger, towering over her as she cowered in fear. The voice returned, louder and more menacing, and the symbols on the walls began to pulse and glow with a sickly green light. "Return me, or face the consequences," the voice hissed. My grandmother would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to convince herself that they were just nightmares, but deep down, she knew they were something more, something far more sinister. Desperate for answers, my grandmother began researching the doll's origins. She returned to the antique shop, but when she arrived, she found that it had closed down. The building was boarded up, and there was no sign of the elderly shopkeeper. It was as if the shop had never existed. Undeterred, she turned to the local library, scouring old records and archives for any mention of the doll or the shop. It was there that she finally found something, a newspaper article from the early 1900s that mentioned a doll maker who had lived in Kyoto during the Edo period. According to the article, the doll maker had been renowned for his lifelike creations, but he had also been rumored to dabble in the dark arts. The article went on to say that one of the doll maker's most famous creations had been cursed after the death of a young girl who had owned it. The girl, who had been the daughter of a wealthy samurai, had died under mysterious circumstances, and it was said that her spirit had become trapped within the doll. My grandmother was horrified by what she had uncovered. She knew then that the doll she had brought into her home was not just an antique, it was something far more dangerous. But what could she do? The doll's influence had already taken hold, and she was afraid that getting rid of it would only anger the spirit further. One night, after weeks of torment, my grandmother decided that she couldn't take it anymore. She had to confront the spirit, no matter the cost. Armed with nothing but her resolve and a prayer, she entered the living room, where the doll sat on its shelf. The air was thick with tension, and the room seemed to darken as she approached the doll. Her hands trembled as she reached out and took the doll into her arms. As she did, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Return me. Return, Mum." With tears streaming down her face, my grandmother began to speak to the doll. She begged the spirit to leave, to find peace and move on from this world. She promised that she would do whatever it took to set the spirit free. But the doll's expression remained twisted, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The whispers grew louder, more menacing, until they were no longer whispers but screams. Screams of anger, of pain, of despair. My grandmother felt a crushing weight on her chest, as if the very air around her was trying to suffocate her. The room spun, and she felt herself slipping into darkness. But she didn't let go of the doll. She held it tightly, repeating her pleas over and over until she could no longer speak. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the room fell silent. When my grandmother opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the floor, the doll clutched tightly in her arms. The oppressive feeling had lifted, and the room was filled with a warm golden light. The doll's expression had changed as well. It was no longer twisted and malevolent, but serene and peaceful once more. After that night, the hauntings ceased. My grandmother placed the doll back on its shelf, but she no longer feared it. She knew that the spirit had finally found peace, and that the curse had been lifted. But the experience left a deep scar on her soul, one that she carried with her for the rest of her life. She never spoke of the doll again, and when she passed away, the doll was buried with her, as per her final request. Our family has been free of the curse ever since, but the memory of that terrifying time remains. I share this story with you, not to frighten you, but to warn you. Be careful of the objects you bring into your home, for you never know what kind of history they carry with them. And if you ever find yourself in possession of something that doesn't feel quite right, trust your instincts. Sometimes, the past should remain buried. Thank you for allowing me to share this story, and I hope it serves as a reminder that some things are better left in the shadows. Best regards. Ayumi. Wow, thank you so much, Ayumi, for sharing such a deeply personal and terrifying story with us. It's incredible how objects from the past can carry such dark energy. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. And as always, stay curious, stay cautious, and I'll see you in the next video.